Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you. I'm sorry that it's online, but I hope we will still have a good chance to have an exchange afterwards so that I can hear more from you. I've been asked to talk about advocacy of hatred based on religion or belief, but perhaps it'll be suitable to first give you a little bit of background. Special rapporteurs of the work for the United Nations, but they're not employees of the United Nations. They are appointed as independent experts to take forward human rights concerns regarding particular countries or particular thematic areas. So there are 14 mandates that relate to particular countries that have severe concerns about human rights. And the rest of the 50 or so mandate holders are concerned with a particular thematic area. So the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, this mandate was started in 1986. So it's existed for some 38 years. And there have been, I'm the 6th mandate holder who has the privilege to serve in this capacity. We serve, it's not a political role and it's not a paid role. So it's an impartial expert role to allow the United Nations human rights mechanisms to keep freedom of religion or belief on their agenda. So as mandate holder, I report twice a year to the United Nations, once to the United Nations General Assembly and another time to the United Nations Human Rights Council. So I choose myself the thematic area to give priority to in those reports. I'm also able to visit 2 countries for a 10-day deep dive to assess the situation of freedom of religion or belief in the country, and then I can also report that to the United Nations. Another thing that a mandate holder can do is to receive communications about incidents that suggest violations of freedom of religion or belief or infringements or restrictions on freedom of religion or belief. And so if I hear from one of you or somebody else, we first ensure that the person or the persons who have reported the situation have given consent. That's hugely important. And then we write it up that, we don't go and do a first-hand assessment. So we put to the state concerned that we have heard reports of such and such incidents and cases of concern. Should these be confirmed, these would be the obligations or rights that have been violated. And we invite the country concerned to respond. So in many instances, this can be yet another effort for advocacy to ensure justice for the persons concerned. And another thing that, we put those allegations to the state. For 60 days, it remains confidential, so that we hope that this encourages the state to look into it and to engage with us. To have a dialogue is an opportunity to see how to improve respect for freedom of religion or belief. And after that, it's made public. So if it's, an unfortunate case of ongoing violations, then the group concerned has also a UN intervention on their behalf that they might bring into their media and other advocacy to try and see justice done. So country missions, allegation letters and other communications and thematic reporting. This is not the full spectrum of what the mandate holder does, because there are engagements and interactions and side events and giving advice on freedom of religion or belief dialogue, etc. So hopefully one of the many tools and mechanisms that seek to see this right respected alongside other human rights. So we know that freedom of religion or belief, we know that the UN saw the advancement of human rights as one of its objectives in the United Nations Human Rights Charter. So one of the aims of the United Nations is to see the advancement of human rights. And freedom of religion or belief was already recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 as one of the rights that were outlined there and of course have since been detailed in other legal instruments, in many constitutions, in many laws around the world, including, of course, in Scotland. And its most robust, the strongest international legal obligation on freedom of religion or belief is found in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. I don't want to bore you with too much law, but at least let's look at the contours of the protection. So, you know, freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief is the right of everyone to have, to adopt, or to change their religion or belief. And we can see from thought, conscience, and religion that this means to change one's religion to another religion, to not believe in a religion, or to go from non-religion to adopting a religion. So, you know, a conscience-led freedom that we can also manifest with others, that, you know, religion or belief can be something very private, but in fact, in most parts of the world and for most peoples, it's something that people want to enjoy, to gather, and to engage others in teaching, in worship, and in a myriad other activities. So some countries of the world, when they say that our constitution guarantees freedom of religion, what they actually mean is in the privacy of your own home, you can have a religion or belief of your choice, but that's not a freedom. I mean, you know, there can't be an intervention we hope, in the home in any case. So, you know, it's really in its expression, its enjoyment with others, including in public and with others, where most of the violations unfortunately accrue. The mandate collaborates with many, but also with parliamentarians. So in fact, I'm just back from the Inter-Parliamentary Union that was meeting in Geneva, where parliamentarians are, you know, very mindful of their responsibilities in overseeing, in ensuring, in revising, in engaging with constituents in human rights, and also regarding freedom of religion or belief. So as Maureen said, I've been in the post for about 20 months. Mandate appointments are for 6 years, so 3 years plus 3 years. And I've had the opportunity to present 4 reports. One of the reports was actually produced by my predecessor. And the first, that one, because there was the changeover, he had written it, but I presented it. And it was about indigenous peoples and freedom of religion or belief. So, you know, there are many different kinds of religiosity and religious practice. And that of indigenous peoples is particularly interesting. And for some laws and some of us, it's, you know, it challenges our preconceptions about religion, its manifestation, what is sacred, and, you know, how that matter of conscience is practiced. The next report I thought would be useful to try and capture the landscape of freedom of religion or belief. So there are many actors in the field of freedom of religion or belief, some led by faith-based actors and secular and humanist organizations, but also many NGOs. It's also a priority in many areas of foreign policy. There are also ambassadors of freedom of religion or belief now in more and more countries. So, and there are, of course, many partnerships, projects, collaborations. So I thought it'd be useful to capture and appreciate them. In terms of interfaith dialogue, for example, as we all know, interfaith dialogue has existed for at least 140 years, 130, 40 years in the formal sense. And one of the questions the report asks is, how come with more and more actors and mechanisms and envoys and priorities and projects, how come we are, you know, we don't seem to be tracking a reduction in violations of freedom of religion or belief? And therefore, how can we challenge ourselves to collaborate more, maybe, you know, sequence our actions better, so that we are more successful in addressing this as a human rights matter? The second report then went from landscape to grassroots, because, you know, what is the point of freedom of religion or belief unless the person on the ground at the grassroots is able to enjoy this freedom? So it's at the neighborhood level, at the local level, the municipality, the sub-regional actors, the planning authorities at the local level, the education authorities. That is where the prejudice and the infringements are often being experienced and perpetuated. So whilst in law, in international law, we primarily recognize the obligation of the state, of course, the state has numerous actors, and we should bring in all of those other actors, the prison officials, the probation authorities, the employment authorities and unions, et cetera, all of us in whatever capacity, either as individual people who can make a difference, or also in whatever role we're carrying out in society, can be playing a role in stemming prejudice, in countering prejudice, and in ensuring freedom of religion or belief for others as well as ourselves. And then the latest report, which was just presented 2 weeks ago, was on advocacy of hatred based on religion or belief. Now, at the international level, and I'll be curious how it exactly plays out in Scotland, sometimes we get into a little bit of a bind on advocacy of hatred based on religion or belief. At least from the perspective of the mandate practice over 38 years, we have to recognize that, of course, advocacy of hatred, means that people there are calls for people to be discriminated and for their rights to be violated because of their religion or belief. But we must also be mindful of hatred in the name of religion or belief. So in many areas of tension, polarization, and conflict around the world, religion is referred to as a justification for violations. And we should also bring that into our purview when we are concerned about freedom of religion or belief. And I use that as the mandate does as a shorthand for thought, conscience, religion, or belief, including non-religion, just so that that's clear. At the international level, this has been the concern about advocacy of hatred based on religion or belief has a long history. And it often boils down to, do we give primacy to freedom of expression or to freedom of religion or belief? And we seem to sort of be really stuck on this, that there's a trade-off between the two and we have to choose between the two. In a particular instance, one may have to adjudicate these questions as one does in any area of human rights adjudication, right? But assuming that these rights are necessarily antagonistic with one another is ignoring the fact that freedom of religion or belief itself is an expressive right. What is freedom of religion or belief without the possibility of expressing it, enjoying it along with others? It becomes that private, lonely freedom that cannot be expressed in any other sense. Secondly, the international debates become really concerned about incitement that must be prohibited and genocide. And sometimes it's sort of put forward as that, if there is hatred, then there will be this inevitable, it's a precursor to incitement, genocide, and mass violations. We need to be mindful of that, but perhaps not alarmist, because otherwise whatever we consider to be hatred really must be immediately criminalized and prevented. Otherwise, there will be this rush towards incitement or genocide. Linked with that is that hate speech must be immediately criminalized. So let's, in the report, I try to change the lens or broaden the lens on some of these questions. First of all, when it comes to advocacy of hatred based on religion or belief, surely the first task is for the state itself to review all of its laws, policies, practices, and how they are being implemented across the jurisdiction. So when there is hatred that is established and perpetuated through state laws, policies, and practices, the report argues that that is most often much more dangerous than the lone wolf actor who is perpetuating hatred, because the standing, the resources, and the continuity of that hatred will be, it's enshrined in law perhaps over decades. So, that perhaps is our first step. This is not a very popular thing to share in an intergovernmental forum, but there you are. Secondly, to make that distinction between state-driven hatred and societal level hatred, even though we should be mindful and act on both, as I will go on to suggest. Thirdly, states sometimes hide behind one another. So if there's an act, if there's social media makes it very easy for hatred in one country to be, borderless and be shared, almost instantaneously across borders. So it's easy for states to say, country X needs to act to stamp this out, otherwise we don't know what is going to happen in our jurisdiction. What this calls for, in my mind, is not only for states to be pointing to other violations across their borders, but also to have better communication with other actors and other states. So that, we have seen historically that, there is an attack or a cartoon or an insult in one country, it's in the media, and months later there are embassy attacks and killings in another. So I'm not saying that this doesn't happen, but I think the first port of call is for states to be thoroughly engaged with one another and be sharing with one another the actions they are taking within their country to address it, rather than blaming the other country and throwing up their hands and saying, therefore, there's nothing I can do about this. What I say in the report is that criminalization comes in too late. The aim of this report was to be looking at transformative responses. Yes, there is hate speech that is at the threshold of Article 20, Part 2 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That treaty asks that we must prohibit incitement to hatred, that the law is very clear about, okay? There's the Rabat Plan of Action suggests a 6-part test to assess whether we are talking about incitement or not. Some of the questions are, who is the speaker? Who is the audience? What is the standing of the speaker? What is the content of what is shared? But what is also the imminence of the risk that may ensue? Not any single one of those questions, but all of those questions need to be brought together and deliberated. So, and it must be a triangular relationship. So, Maureen, I cannot incite you. I need to incite, for example, Jamie to attack you. And, I might upset you, I hope not, but it may be that I deeply offend and upset you, but I cannot incite you directly. Incitement means I get another group to then violate your rights and the imminence of risk to you. And that is often forgotten in the debates as well, but that is the requirement of what incitement constitutes, and that therefore it must be criminalized in those circumstances. But we can't, I think, in the environment we're living in, particularly today, and particularly with all due respect, parliamentarians who are in the business of legislation, there might be a quick rush to legislation as some kind of solution to this deep-seated and serious challenge around the world. But criminalization is after everything has escalated and, Jamie and others are open to being incited to attacking Maureen, et cetera, et cetera. So, many things have gone wrong in society by then. And therefore, education, engagement, dialogue, joint projects, understanding one another, the political authorities being, not themselves using hatred to come to power and not negotiating or trading on hatred for their own popularity. All of those things need to be in place in order to address it at source. So we have many tools to address hatred. Criminalization indeed should be on the books, and there should be the possibility to criminalize when there is this threat of violating Article 20, Part 2. But we need to transform and to engage at a far earlier stage to prevent hatred based on religion or belief and the violations that flow. Civil society actors, faith-based actors have a key role in prevention, something that is often overlooked and underappreciated, but critical to every cohesive society. So in short, the report had a much broader lens than purely focusing on genocide and incitement. and asks that we have a much more calibrated response to hatred. We should care about people being offended. The authorities should be alert to people reporting harm. People who have lived with hatred and harm and have a sense of disbelonging, it has psychosocial impact, but also the research suggests that it has physiological effects. So, there is generational trauma, and if you look at the life expectancy of people that feel disenfranchised and they are under suspicion and they don't feel they belong as equals in a society. These are severe impacts that it can have on them. We should care about all of those. We should respond and take note of those patterns. We should act early in response to them, but criminalization is too blunt a tool to be using in all of those instances. Violations of hatred based on religion or belief will often also be associated with racism, with anti-migrant sentiments, and other hatreds as well. We should also be alert to the fact that sometimes it is instrumentalized in order to violate the rights of others. So with that, I hope it gives us a broader basis on which to discuss this issue, and for me to benefit from learning about the Scottish reality and the responses that are already underway there and challenges that may remain. Thank you.